It isn't a court of law, but this committee's judgment could finish his career. And it's already laid out what it sees as the case against him.
This is Mr Johnson's opportunity to give us his answers.
Boris Johnson checked his watch before swearing the oath.
The evidence I shall give for this committee shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
The committee then played him some of the statements they say could show him lying to Parliament.
There was no party. All guidance was followed and the rules were followed. That is what I have been repeatedly assured.
Boris Johnson said he defended every single statement made.
I'm here to say to you, hand on heart, that I did not lie to the House. When those statements were made, they were made in good faith.
We will now suspend the sitting whilst the House of Commons votes.
Within minutes, he was quickly interrupted by the division bell. All MPs called away to vote on his successor's attempt to renegotiate his Brexit deal. Boris Johnson voted against the Windsor framework, breaking a 3-line whip. And when he got back to the committee, he suggested if they judged gatherings breached rules, they were saying officials and Rishi Sunak should have noticed.
If it was obvious to me that these events were contrary to the guidance and the rules, it must have been obvious to others in the building, including the current Prime Minister.
As the committee questioned Boris Johnson, screens around the room showed photographs from the Downing Street gatherings.
The photographs show a lack of social distancing of 2 metres, which was required by the workplace guidance at the time.
It was 1 metre we were together.
So do you accept that you were present at this gathering and that people were not socially distanced while you were there?
I accept that perfect social distancing, Sir Bernard, is not being observed, but that does not mean that what we were doing, in my view, is incompatible with the guidance.
They were necessary meetings to lead and enthuse his workforce in difficult times, the former Prime Minister said, and guidance was followed within the limitations of an old building.
We avoided physical contact. We didn't, for instance, as the guidance says, we didn't touch each other's pens. We didn't pass stuff to each other if we could possibly avoid it. We kept. Though not every, I would not wish to say that was perfectly implemented.
Presumably, people were passing drinks to each other because we've seen the picture.
Of course, and I'm not. And this is guidance. This is guidance, and I'm not going to pretend that it was enforced rigidly. But that's explicitly what the guidance provides for.
Throughout the session, the Prime Minister's taxpayer-funded 6-figure legal team offered muttered advice and notes.
Yes, you don't see you don't see perspex screens there, but that doesn't mean that there wasn't sanitizer.
One MP, a former policeman, said the committee had visited number 10 and was puzzled how Boris Johnson could have missed some boozy social gatherings on his way to the Downing Street flat.
There's a corridor, a narrow corridor, leading to the vestibule. Before you get to it, the staircase on the left leads to your flat. Your direct line of sight would be into the vestibule, not more than a few metres away. There's a gathering taking place with between 25 and 40 people. You had clear direct line of sight of that room. Are you telling me that your evidence is that you're not aware of the noise or the event taking place?
Absolutely, and what I would have, if I had looked, what I would have seen, I'm sure, was people doing a huge amount of work on a very, very busy evening.
The committee asked not only if he'd seen enough with his own eyes to know guidelines and rules were broken, but also whether he'd willfully covered up rule-breaking in number 10 by not correcting the Commons' denials he'd given.
At no point did you tell the House that you knew that there had been gatherings that you had attended, in particular the 5 we've raised with you.
In my mind at the time, these did not seem to me to be improper or offensive events. So they weren't in my consciousness because I thought they were work events.
The committee wanted to know who Boris Johnson was talking about when he said he'd been repeatedly advised that COVID rules weren't broken inside number 10.
Well, I'm very grateful that you recall Sarah Dimes MP and Andrew Griffith MP giving you the assurances, but you were present at those meetings where those 2 MPs said that assurances had been given. So if I just may ask the question, and you can correct me if I've misunderstood the point, who were the officials who gave these assurances in this meetings that you've referred to at paragraph 90 in your written submissions?
Well, I can't name these
Name
officials.
me one.
I don't know if I don't know if I can. I think that.
Why not?
I think that most of them have indicated they
Are you
don't
not
want
naming them
themselves
because
to be
you can't remember their
to
names,
be
or
to be
because
named.
you don't want to breach
And
their anonymity?
There's at least one advisor that I can think of that who was asked not to be named.
I, along with my colleagues, was in the House at the time when these assurances were given, and we took them to be serious assurances. You told the House you'd received assurances. Would you not expect us to be a bit dismayed to hear that it was not from the senior civil servants, it was from political appointees, that they themselves had doubts about it? It only covered one gathering, it didn't cover the other three, and it only covered the rules, it didn't cover the guidance.
The question that I think the committee is trying to unpick is that a good enough assurance? Is it good enough to rely on the Director of Communications and the former Director of Communications about one event, no matter how eminent they may be? And I think the answer is yes.
Tory MPs asked Boris Johnson to distance himself from supporters of his who'd mocked the committee as a kangaroo court.
But you wouldn't categorise it as a witch hunt or a kangaroo court. That's the point I'm asking.
I think I will wait to see how you proceed with the evidence that you have.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, sitting behind Boris Johnson, had already tweeted, Boris is doing very well against the marsupials.
I much enjoyed our discussion. Well,
Harriet Harman accused Boris Johnson of relying on flimsy advice to make important statements to Parliament. Boris Johnson said he hoped the committee would see what was in his heart at the time.
Well, the Prime Minister has published his long-awaited UK tax documents covering the past 4 years. Rishi Sunak promised to publish them when he ran for the Tory leadership last summer, and critics were quick to question the timing of the release, which came on an extremely busy day in Westminster. Our policy correspondent Paul McNamara is in the newsroom. Paul.
Yeah, these are quite big numbers, Chris. So 3 years worth of numbers, total earnings about £4.9 million. In that time, more than £1 million worth in tax. Last year was a particularly good year indeed. So we had £432,493 worth of tax on earnings of just shy of £2 million. And the tax, there's a few different elements of tax that he's paying here. Not just on his salary, we've got investment income, we've got capital gains tax. Now, the two big criticisms of this are, first of all, as you mentioned, this is quite a busy news day in which the tax returns have been released. Second of all, these aren't full tax returns. This is a summary of what the Prime Minister has paid in tax. And talking to tax accountants this evening, trying to get them to provide some comment, the one comment they've said is, we can't actually tell very much. We've got capital gains here last year of £325,000, but we don't know what that was on. We've got dividends from investments of £172,000. But if we don't know what they're invested in, we don't really know what to make of it. All that we really can say of all of this is that we knew at the beginning of the day that the Prime Minister was a very wealthy man that had a lot of money. We know that again today. We've just got it confirmed.
Thanks, Paul. Well, the former Cabinet Minister and GB News presenter, Jacob Rees-Mogg, joins me now. What do you think about the publishing of tax returns? Would you do it yourself? Is it a good thing for politicians?
I'm not going to volunteer to do mine, but if it becomes the norm of British politics, then British politicians will do it. And my expectation is that in due course, it will become the norm of British politics.
Right. So then we'll find out how much you're earning from GB News.
You'll find that out anyway, because I have to declare that in the normal course of parliamentary declarations.
Let's talk about Boris Johnson. You said the Privileges Committee were marsupials today. They clearly take a very dim view of being accused of being a kangaroo court. Do you want to apologise?
No, of course I don't. And of course they don't like being called a kangaroo court, but I think their whole process has been quite extraordinary. You should have seen how red Harriet Harman went when Boris Johnson reminded her of what she said before she took over as chairman of the committee. Chris Bryant had the wit, had the sense to recuse himself as chairman of that committee because he'd expressed a view on Boris Johnson beforehand.
But Boris Johnson himself said he respects the committee, he rejected the term kangaroo court.
Boris Johnson is up in front of the court. He's not in a position to...
Oh, so he didn't mean it?
No. I mean, if you are the defendant in a case, you can't say that the court is no good. I am an outside observer in relation to this Privileges Committee. I'm entitled to say that I think its procedures are bad and its chairman should stand aside.
Right, so, I mean, you do sound like you have contempt for the Privileges Committee. I mean, calling them a kangaroo court is holding them in contempt, isn't it?
It is a committee of the House of Commons which I believe is not operating to a proper standard and is chaired by somebody who should not chair it.
Because the Speaker this morning wrote to all MPs warning them about intimidating the Privileges Committee, didn't he?
Well, I'm not speaking to any individuals of the committee. That would be, it is quite unallowed to go up to members of the committee and say, I think you should do X, Y or Z. But it is completely proper to make public comments. You will look back to the John Junior case when he was brought to the bar of the House of Commons for saying members of Parliament were fiddling their petrol coupons. The House did that last in the 1950s and looked so absurd when it tried to say anyone who criticised what went in the House that it has stopped doing it. People are entitled to have a view as to whether the House is doing its job well or whether any of its committees are doing its job well. And I think the Privileged Committee is not doing its job well.
Well, speaking of looking absurd, I mean, a lot of your colleagues think Parliament would look absurd if it tried to overturn the findings of the Privileges Committee, which after all has a Conservative majority, and its report that was published laying out the charges against Boris Johnson was a unanimous report. There was no disagreement.
Well, I thought it was very odd to put the evidence for the prosecution in that way without having heard the evidence for the defence, therefore not
just like
having
laying out the charges,
a balanced report. No, it was much more detailed than simply announcing charges. All committees of the House are subsidiary to the House itself. They have their authority from the House and they report to the House. No report of any committee is validated unless accepted by the House. That is the normal constitutional procedure.
But do you not feel now that you're in a pretty marginal minority? I mean, we saw how marginal it was in today's vote over Northern Ireland.
Well,
I mean, you know, you're a couple of dozen at best.
So that was a completely different vote. That wasn't relating to the Privileges Committee. I think Boris Johnson today has won in the court of public opinion. It's been quite clear that he behaved...
What makes you think that?
Because it's quite clear...
I mean, he lost his temper, he was bad-tempered with the committee.
It's quite clear that he behaved properly, that he told the truth as he understood it at the time, as he had been advised. He told the truth as he perceived it,
that he saw... If you were confident, you wouldn't look that rattled, would you? You wouldn't attack the... No, not you, him. He looked rattled. He was aggressive, he was angry, he got irritated.
It was a very, very long session. I thought, actually, he modelled himself on the cucumber and was pretty cool.
Really?
Yeah, he handled it very well.
So, I mean, if the House... You know, if his sentence, if you like, is over 10 days suspension, he would then face a by-election, almost certainly. It's inconceivable, isn't it? My point is that would be overturned. There won't be enough of you, even if you argue strongly.
We'll have to wait and see what the committee suggests, but I think that if Boris Johnson went to a by-election, he would win it comfortably. Because I think he's winning in the court of public opinion, who see this as a kangaroo court.
So in that case, perhaps you welcome a by-election and the chance to hand this over to the people.
I always trust the people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei, as I say on GB News every night. But I think it's right to trust the voters. I've actually always thought that recall should be a much more broad principle. I very much supported what Zach Goldsmith tried to do on that, because I think the British voter is very sensible and very fair.
Sounds like you think it's happening.
No, I don't.
He's going to be facing the voters, and he'll probably be out.
I wouldn't read that into what I'm saying at all, but would I fear the electorate? No, certainly not. That's a vibrant democracy.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed.
Always a pleasure, thank you.